Great. Thank you, Peter. Okay, well, welcome to our February 11th Policy Committee meeting. And we want to welcome Kate Dean, one of our student reps, joining us, as well as welcome Ms. McNamee, who's the new education reporter for the Duluth News Tribune, who's here to observe, and she is a Duluth Public Schools grad. So that is great. Got a few items on the agenda, and I just wanted to note when we get to a couple of the policies that Jen Larva is going to be reviewing with us, if it's okay with all of you, we're going to take the regulation and the form that goes with those policies. Just she needs to leave early, so if that's okay. Okay, great, thank you. These first two policies for first reading are new policies, so we don't have an old policy to look at. The first one is Policy 525, Violence Prevention. And the purpose of this policy is to recognize that violence has increased and to identify measures that the school district will take in an attempt to maintain a learning and working environment that is free from violent and disruptive behavior. The school board is committed to promoting healthy human relationships and learning environments that are physically and psychologically safe for all members of the school community. It further believes that students are the first priority and they should be protected from physical or emotional harm doing school activities and on school grounds, buses, or field trips while under school district supervision. And we have Jason Crane here, and if you could introduce yourself as well, Jason, to walk us through this new policy.
Jason Crane, Special Ed Director for Duluth Public Schools. Violence in our school is not a new topic. This, as you said, Ms. Member Laffer-Kemp, is a new policy to Duluth Public Schools. So the implementation of this policies will be vast, and the responsibilities are quite, I don't want to say cumbersome, but complex. So it's going to take a comprehensive review by several of our department leaders, including Lexi Neff, Danette Sebo, our health education staff, Todd McGowan, Mr. Todd McGowan will be a part of this as well, because we have implications to train staff, to train students differently than we've ever done in the past because of this policy. In addition, I have laid out in front of me all the different corresponding policies that this policy references, and we will bring those forward in the next several months as well to get updates on those. But the district chose to bring this policy 525 first, and we knew that there would be a lot of questions around what the implications are for this policy. We do have an older violence prevention policies. It's 5022. We will eventually phase that policy out in a couple months after we implement a couple other first readings for some other policies. You'll notice within 525, sprinkled throughout, there's reference to policy 506. We've updated that one to December 23. I won't read them all, but 504 was a 23 policy, 413, and I have a harassment in the schools. It was a 16 policy. All of those will get updates, and MSBA has published some newer versions of those policies, especially if they're like 516 is like 8 years old right now. We have some newer versions waiting for us to adopt. So I'll pause after that brief introduction of policy 525 and see if there's some pointed. Remember, Mike Cassell, you sent me an email today through Patty, which I finally had a chance to read at 3:15. As you might expect, the director sometimes sits in IEP meetings. I have got to like 5 emails today, so I saw your questions, and a lot of the response to that is we're going to have to implement it moving forward. We haven't done a lot of those things to educate staff and students like this policy references yet. You also referenced legal interpretation related to the weapons question you had. We do have a weapons policy, and I think that you had asked if we need some specific citation language. In this policy, we could take a look at that, but I think specifically updating our weapons policy would be more appropriate for that statute. Agree or disagree?
I'll leave it to the chair. we would bring that policy forward, and you can make that recommendation at the time, I
Okay,
think. Yeah.
makes sense.
Is this policy, something that's coming forward because of legislative
We need
work
this
last
policy.
week?
Several.
Oh, yeah, we need it, but
Yep, several
if-
statutes have recently received legislative updates for us to consider having this, and we need this statute.
Yep, I agree. And I think the weapon policy, when we get through the months of looking at this, would maybe become more of a understanding from not just this policy committee, but maybe our board as well. But we'll take it in steps. And what is our weapon policy number?
501.
501, yeah, okay.
And 501 is referenced in this policy, Member Lofold.
Yes.
Do you want to, besides the policies that are referenced in this policy, and then the policy 5022 that we will be deleting at some point, were there any additional policies you mentioned that you're going to bring forward, just so we could maybe make a note to look ahead on?
Take note of a number 529 will likely come next month. And that is a pairing of a policy related to violence in schools that actually has a regulation, and it recommends a regulation document to use in our schools. And that 529 sets the standard of what action a student may display, of when we need to give notice to our staff in the school setting of a student with a violent action in our schools. So 529 kind of ramps up these standards for when in our schools we would respond and provide notice.
Okay. And one other thing, if you receive questions from any board members, and would you make sure all board members get the response too?
Okay.
So that's just helpful for all of us. Yeah.
Okay.
A question on that. Do you, if there's a question asked by a subcommittee member, do we want it sent to the whole board or just the subcommittee members? Fine either way. Probably better whole board, but just asking.
I'm not sure. I think, I guess it depends on where it is in the process of being reviewed by the policy committee. I mean, it will go in front of the board at the consent agenda if it's under its first reading. So.
Yeah, good question, because really sometimes if we are asking questions of our leaders in this process of understanding the policy, and our full board hasn't really quite even been in conversation, then responding to that whole board at that point. And if we can help you in that communication, reach out to Chair Loeffler-Kemp, and she can maybe share whether it should go to all or just the policy committee at that point.
And I guess with that, if someone has a question, they should bring it to the policy committee, the board members on the policy committee as well. Member Michelson?
Yeah, so a few points or questions I have. So in our purpose, the purpose of this policy is to recognize that violence has increased. So before we go any further, is this something that we want to have in our policy, which will be there until it gets amended or looked at again in 3 years or sooner if the state asks us to do that? Is that statement accurate for Duluth Public Schools? Or is that more of a generalized statement that our legislature has said in general?
So I believe it's a true statement because the laws around students remaining in schools has increased for the side of the students. We've been able to implement so much harsher discipline in years past where we can't do some of those same measures right now, especially students in grades K through 3. We should not be removing them for lengthy periods of time. So because of that, we have more incidents in the school building.
Okay, thank you. And then when I look at this policy, I see it as being very much a summary of all of our other policies that touch on violence in the schools. So when I was first going through and reading it, I'm like, why do we need this? We have all of these items mentioned in other spots. And so it seemed as though it was trying to be a one-stop shop of where a person can go to look at for different subjects. Is that an accurate representation of this first portion of the policy?
I think your interpretation is somewhat correct, although this particular policy really highlights the emphasis on training staff and students, where some of the other policies don't have that same standard.
Okay, and so those things would be new,
Yep.
the training of staff and
Yep.
students. A concern I have in just like hearing our discussion is that this is our first reading, so we'll be giving feedback and asking some questions. We'll be looking into those things, I imagine. It'll be come back in March for our second reading, and then potentially, depending on how those conversations go, be on the March regular school board agenda for a full vote of the board. If there are items in this policy that state that we will be, the Duluth Public Schools will be implementing certain strategies, and we're not ready to do that, is it in our best interest to pass a policy before those things are set in place? And maybe that's more of a question for upper administration. Yeah,
Yeah, I think in general, sometimes policy, correct me if I'm wrong, but in general, policy does lay out the intent, and even if things have not yet been accomplished, it lays the framework for this shall be done. So I think that there have been times in the past where we put out policies that say this is the way things operate. And even though the implementation of those operational pieces isn't fully in place yet, it's with the understanding that it needs to come as quickly as possible, and that if there were ever any significant challenge related to an element being missing, that would be on us as a school district to make sure that we put it in place, if that makes sense. Like thinking about, I don't know, just if there's notification that needs to go out, if we say there's notification that needs to go out regarding some policy, and we built it in, but we haven't created the communication yet, it would be on us to create that communication, make sure it occurred.
okay. I guess I'm just trying to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for, having liability of something that we have not yet implemented, but we have a policy stating that we have.
Right, and I think that that's where we need to make sure that we are following up, so it's
Okay.
not,
I've
paved with
also
good
seen
intention.
in past policy committee meetings where it doesn't necessarily have to go to a second reading the very next month. If there's, Director Crane just said, this is going to take months to kind of move, especially this policy, because it seems to have a lot in it. He said it might take months to kind of get everyone and all of the different policies. So I don't think we need to feel rushed to necessarily even call the next month to call it a second reading. Maybe we're going to assume, or they're going to direct us that, we're not, but.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and we have done that with other policies, actually, that Jason has brought in front of us, where either the staff knew there was more work needed on it, or we asked for different clarifications, and so we have brought it forward for a second reading, a month or two down the road. So,
Great.
yeah.
Another question I have then is, under prevention strategies, we're lucky to have the Minnesota School Board Association and their staff, provide us with these model templates. And so it does state that school boards can adopt any of the following prevention strategies, but that's up to the school district and school board. And so I was curious if all of the strategies A through S, I believe, if these are all things that you feel we should be attempting to put in place here, or if there are certain ones, that are more priority or less of a priority, or if these are things that you and your staff will be working on here as we move forward with it.
That was a great question, and I'll be honest with you, we will look at each one of these and consider implementation of all of them. Have I prioritized a list of them? No, I have not prioritized that, but definitely willing to consider that. Just wanted to lastly add to the questions about have we implemented something? We have. We provided a comprehensive training, hour-long session with Amy Mace this year on legal issues and discipline issues and violence in our schools. So Amy provided that for our whole employee base this year. So we're doing some things already. I today was on a leader call with a company called Infinitec. It's one of our online platforms. I'm one of 5 special ed directors that get to sit on their board meeting every 2 months. And I requested that they create another training module around violence in schools. So they always listen to the director's suggestions for training elements, and hopefully in the near future, they'll record something that is exactly around this policy. We could use that with students. We could potentially use that with staff.
Great, that's good that you have that.
And if I can add, if you take a look at the list, I mean, there are many things that we have in place. We do have student badges that are required by every student, which is one of the items here, is just make sure we have a clear process or procedures for the identification of students through our badges and make sure that we have them. We are and have implemented anti-bullying policies and practices. We have Second Step in our schools where students are taught, how to treat one another and how to, not engage in bullying type behaviors and so forth. So there's a number of things that we have in place already. And this is just, it looks like to me a very comprehensive list of things that we could do and we should be considering as a school district. And I'll add the last thing is if we think about over the last 2 years, we really focused on school safety and buzzer systems for schools and how we enter into the building, making sure staff are securing doors and so forth and so on. So it lists a host of things that we should be considering, but I would say that there are many of these things that are happening, and Jason, Director Crane is correct. We have to continue to assess where we are with some of these and implement them over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of these things are all embedded in other policies that we have, which again goes back to this is very much a summary of items and actions that we have in other places. So again, some work for us then whenever we end up having to switch something somewhere, we're going to have to make sure that we come back to this one and make sure that there's not an update that needs to happen here in the future.
Thank you.
Can I ask just a question? So Director Crane brings this policy forward more as a director of special education or just because you are leading this particular revision or need for this?
I'm on a team of other directors, including Jen in the back there, that really works at the purview of our superintendents. And when someone needs to raise their hand and help out, I help out. So that's why I'm bringing it.
It just made me, as a new member of the policy and not always seeing the process from this angle, I see it from watching it on video, or I just wondered if this was more particular to special education, and it's not.
No, this is district-wide, Gen Ed,
yeah.
kids first, and see a need, feel the need, and help out.
And we're grateful for that help.
And appreciate also that you kind of gave the highlight of who you're bringing to the table to review these policies as well. So, and that's the case, and Kate, just so you know, when staff come to us with policies, often they either are bringing or have met with a variety of staff throughout the district depending on what the topic is. Sometimes it's with students as well, so, which has been some of our past policies too. So thank you for highlighting that. Member Michael?
Yeah, one last thing. I just want to make sure that it's clear, the last item, then the questions that I had provided to the policy chair and administration regarding some of my curiousness about this is a resolution that was passed by the school board in 2022. It's not a state law or anything. So regarding the sharing of information about secure storage of firearms to parents in our district and guardians. And so that's not a state statute, that's a resolution that was passed by the school board as something that should happen every year, at least. So that's why I just wanted to mention that that would potentially be a good preventative strategy to add to this policy if the majority feel that's the case.
Perhaps we could talk about that, Anthony, John, at a later point and determine if we want to add it to this policy. Right? Right?
Is there, and it's not out of disagreement, but is just with a couple of committee members, is that something that you would support as well? Or do you want us to have further consideration at the next board meeting?
The
Or the
resolution?
next, yes, that we can include that as one of the practices within here.
It frankly should probably be a broader board discussion because we voted on that in resolution, not in policy, so.
True. Thanks.
But I do agree with Member Michaelsell that it could fall under this policy as a preventative, and we've appreciated the district sending out information in the past, but to put a little bit more teeth in it would be a really great show of leadership in our district, so.
Thank you.
Since this is our first reading, I guess I expected that, not that you'd go point by point through all of this, but I thought that, maybe we would hear a little bit more about some of the intricacies within this policy that, were maybe more difficult for your connection, or, I'm just, that's fine, I'll read it again too, but is there a team that we worked with on this policy as it is right now? Or is that something you're doing after this first reading, that you're going to then share this with a team of people that will give you feedback as they see it from their staff or their principalship side?
So I listed some of the names before, and I'll just refresh the memory. Danette Siebel, Lexi Neff behind us, Todd McGowan, Health Education Department leader, which I can't remember her name right now for the life of me, but I met with all those people individually and or in pairs, but never as a whole group. So the next step would bring the whole group together and really analyze. Within this policy, a lot of things are district responsibility to teach staff, district responsibility to teach kids, and that's what we're going to be focused on when we get together, is how to accomplish each one of those separate projects.
I appreciate, just from being policy chair, this is a little bit different in some ways. I mean, some policies you're meeting after and you're bringing it forward. I think because this policy impacts so many other policies, having you presenting it to us this way is a good thing. It gives us a chance to really do our homework as well. And because it, again, impacts many other policies, I appreciate you just bringing it forward in this way. So thank you. Mhm. Okay, any other questions on that policy? Okay, so the next policy for second reading is policy 519, interviews of students by outside agencies. And the purpose of this policy, there are occasions in which persons other than school district officials and employees find it necessary to speak with a student during the school day. School safety and disruption of the educational program is of concern to the school district. The purpose of this policy is to establish the procedures for access to students by authorized individuals during the school day. And this is a new policy, and I'm not sure if there will be some other policies for deletion on this. No? Okay. And so are you going to speak towards this?
Yes, I'll speak towards this one, 519. So this is the first opportunity for us as a district to adopt this policy. And it's very timely in terms of things that are happening nationally with communications and interactions with community members and in particular students. And so at the advice of our district attorney, she advised us that we probably want to make sure that we have a clear policy in place on who can have access to students and interview students. So this policy is being moved forward under that advice as well. And it's pretty straightforward. We have a lot of agencies who already come into our schools, speak with our students. They could be Child Protective Services, it could be police officers that are not SRO related, because if there's a crime in the community, it could be officers coming in to potentially speak to students. So those are just some examples, and this is just a policy that's probably overdue. Even here, I see that it was done in 1995 as the original date for when MSBA adopted it, and we as a district just have not adopted. And I think it's very good and prudent that we adopt such a policy to clarify for our families and the community, and especially for our students, the process for outside agencies or entities interviewing students. So this is pretty straightforward in terms of what is being requested. And you'll see in here, it does speak to the Maltreatment of Minors Act, because there are situations that also came through as questions for board members related to it. There are situations where there has to be clear understanding that certain entities can interview kids, and there will not be notification to families. And that's because if there is suspected abuse or something that's going on, clearly, we cannot notify or will not notify families ahead of time if it's believed to be in that realm. So this gives some clear indications of there are times when you don't call or contact family members. So it's pretty straightforward policy in terms of what is being required. Our district team has reviewed it, and we're going to have more discussions with our principals at our upcoming principal meeting. It has been shared with principals. It has been shared with our Teacher Learning Equity Committee and all district administrators for review. We send those things out via email or have different ways of sending things out. But it has not had a deep discussion with our principals yet, because that meeting is coming up this week, or because the principal lesson meeting, I think, is tomorrow, I believe.
It is.
It is tomorrow.
I have a question that I probably should know the answer to, but are any school staff considered mandated reporters?
We all are.
Yeah, I mean, and no matter what role you play within the
No
school?
matter what role you play in the district,
Yeah.
board members included, we are all mandated reporters.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that, but,
Coaches. Yep, everyone receives the training, everyone receives the requirement of the video that is required, but we all are mandated reporters.
are substitute teachers as well?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any questions on this policy? Member Mike Cassell?
So thank you, Assistant Superintendent Bonds. As I look at this, I'm really only seeing the maltreatment of minors as the reason why we would allow someone to come in and interview a student without notifying parents or guardians. Am I understanding that?
No, I think, as I read it, it qualifies it by saying if it's a suspicion of something that's in line with that code for the maltreatment of minors, that would be the exception to the rule of communicating with families prior to that entity being able to speak with the student or interviewing the student.
Okay.
So I read it as that, but this covers police officers, this covers any.
So, but if
outside-
law enforcement does come in and it's not necessarily due to maltreatment by a parent or guardian at home, we do need to notify the parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. And then generally, students may not be interviewed during the school day by persons other than the student's parents, school district officials, employees, or agents, except as otherwise provided by law or this policy. So typically, we're trying not to do that during the school day.
correct.
Okay, just making sure you understand that. And then I didn't really see any specific language about like judicial warrants versus other kind of warrants. Does our law or our lawyers feel that that needs to be included in this policy?
At this point in time, no. We believe this covers us with where we are nationally. And if things change over time and we have to come back and modify this policy, we will. But right now, the goal was just to adopt this policy because it gave some direction for district and admin when someone attempts to interview students.
And to your earlier point about that we should be avoiding interviews related to other circumstances, I think the intention of that, having done some work on this as well previously, is that we want to make sure that law enforcement isn't using the opportunity of, or the perceived opportunity or real opportunity of having a student who is not necessarily in the care of their parent or guardian, where they might be able to exercise other avenues of asking for an attorney or something like that. So, so that the law enforcement isn't saying, let's purposely go to school and try to get our investigation done there. That's part of the intent that's built into these policies.
And even to go just a little further, just know that most often there's a regulation. We don't have a regulation that we're bringing, but we have communicated with our administrators through the guidance of our attorney how they should respond when an entity such as ICE would want to speak with the student. So we have provided guidance for our administrators under a practice, but it's not codified in policy at this point in time.
I think one of my comments under this policy, and you highlighted Assistant Superintendent Bonds, that you'll be reviewing this more with principals, but principals play a huge role with this policy in terms of working with law enforcement and granting permission, contacting the students' parents, et cetera. So, I'll be interested in seeing, what kind of support we have within the principals or any other, maybe further recommendations, particularly around the regulation piece and, so they're feeling like they have the tools to implement this as well, so.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Member Loeffel?
Just a quick question, and I think it's in other areas, but if the principal, like Member Chair Loeffler-Kemp said, if the principals are the ones that really are going to have responsibility in this area, is that also an assistant principal? I know in our last comment, students shall not be taken from district property without the consent of the principal. So is it the principal?
That
Only.
includes the assistant principal as well.
It does.
Right. It would be
Does
that,
that need to be specific in there, do you think, especially?
I guess
mean,
it's
we
something
have
we
so
will,
many
look into
assistant-
that
Yeah.
for that distinction, because it usually would, when they say principal, it's usually, that includes the assistant principal as well. So the individual who
Okay.
is responsible for, obviously, supporting the building and providing administrative support for the building, and is a licensed administrator for the building. So it's usually the assistant principal and principal who has that licensure. But I will seek some clarification though on that, if we need to specifically state assistant principals.
Thanks.
Okay, great,
question.
thanks. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you for bringing both of these policies forward. They're very important policies, like many of our policies are. Okay, the next policy then for second reading is policy 806. And again, with this policy, 806 crisis management, this is replacing 4040, safety of students, staff, and public, and 4040R, the regulation school district security procedures. And we had a lot of discussion with this policy in the first reading of it. We have a copy of the new, with the changes that were made. And again, we had Lexi as well as Danette Siebel with us last month to walk us through this policy. I'll just read the purpose once again. The purpose of this crisis management policy is to act as a guide for school district and site administrators, school employees, students, school board members, and community members to address a wide range of potential crisis situations in the school district. The step-by-step procedures suggested by this policy will provide guidance to each school site in drafting crisis management plans to coordinate protective actions prior to, during, and after any type of emergency or potential crisis situation. Each school district shall develop tailored site-specific crisis management plans for each school site in the school district, and sections or procedures may be added or deleted in those crisis management plans based on site needs. The school district will engage in ongoing emergency planning within the school district and with emergency responders and other relevant community organizations. The school district will ensure that relevant emergency responders in the community have access to their site-specific crisis management plans and will provide training to school district staff to enable them to act appropriately in the event of a crisis. Could you please introduce yourself for the public?
Absolutely. So my name is Lexi Neff. I am the district's Health, Safety, and Environmental Coordinator. Danette Sebo, who is a principal on a special assignment, definitely took the lead on this one, but she was not able to make it tonight. So hopefully I'm able to answer all of the questions you have, and yeah.
Okay.
I believe the only major change we had from the first reading to now, due to some questions that this group brought up, was the opt-out procedures. So we had initially struck that section out, but due to concerns from the group, we discussed again, and we added that back into the procedure.
And can you review again for everyone which section that is?
Yes, I believe it is section D. Page, what page is this here? Page 6.
I just noticed my attachments are in the incorrect order on board book. So the one that is, when you're looking at the attachments, the one that has 2/11/25 as the date, it's the last one. It shows the section she's referring to in red, and then in yellow is our district verbiage that we added to it, if that's helpful.
Section D,
Yes. Section 4D.
4D.
Yep.
You did get some answers to some questions that came up. Is there any further questions on the questions? Okay. And again, this is for the second reading. And it might be, this is a good example, Kate, I'm kind of sometimes going to refer to Kate as a way to do some training with her, is that, you'll see at the end of the policies, it says when we last adopted it, and so this policy was adopted in 2019, bringing it forward. We had our first reading in January of 2025, so this is the second reading. Member Michael.
I appreciate some of the updates to the notice of active shooter drills, which are not active shooter simulations, which needs to be made very clear. Some of the language that we're required to use because of state statute makes it difficult to really or clearly convey that in our policy. But I do feel that that matches state statute and the language that they have in their statutes, as well as MSBA's interpretation of that as well. And so publishing our tentative drill dates, will that be our method of communication of at least 24 hours before, as state statute requires us
Yes,
to do?
yep, that is the plan going forward. They'll be posted on the schools' calendars. The goal is to have that done at the beginning of the year for all of the goals, or sorry, all of the drills that are planned, with the caveat that the dates are tentative, just because if there's something that happened at the school in the community, something like that, we want to be able to reschedule those drills if needed.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that we're sensitive to those kind of situations. And then looking and seeing that we now have a plan in place for parents or guardians who do decide to opt their children out of the active shooter drills, otherwise known as a lockdown drill here in Duluth Public Schools. thank you for looking into that. And was there any further discussion or like conversations that happened around that, or that just seems to be the most appropriate way to do it?
Yeah, so we reached out to the Minnesota School Safety Center, which is a branch of the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And they gave us some best practices that they've had from both the legislature and different schools in their implementation. So we were able to take some of those best practices and add them to our policy.
Great, thank you so much for doing all that work.
Okay, any further questions or comments? And again, this is replacing, and you have it in your packet, 4040 and 4041, the regulation. Again, Katie, we have a lot of policies that fell under what was a 1,000 series that we're replacing with the series that's like the 100, 200, 300 series. So if you hear that, it's not that we're totally deleting, it's usually embedded in the new policy in some framework, or maybe we feel it's outdated. Okay, thank you.
So a question just for Patty. So this is for second reading, and we will put it on our consent agenda for this February's meeting. When we get the board book packet, will this policy look, will it be void of all of the red and all of the cutouts? It's really hard sometimes to really get the flow of what we're passing when we've made these kind of adjustments. So it'll, and not that I want to come up with any new obstacles to pass this, because I think it's really complete. I just want other board members that are not on our policy to see what it looks like in finalization. Thank you.
Did you want to add something, Patty?
Yes.
I was just going to add, I always do like each version as it comes, so then they can see each version, and it just happened on this one. I didn't notice it before I published it, that the most recent version was after the deletions, so that's why it was really confusing today to see the part. But if I would have had it in the right place on board book, you would have been able to see, I had done all the corrections in black of the first reading, and for the second reading, it just had the suggestions they were bringing for now. I just had them in the wrong order. So,
And just a reminder, if it's in yellow, that's current policy. If it's red, it's our school board association. Okay. So,
We don't have many policies that are 15 pages, do we?
we have a few. Okay, sorry, my computer keeps going off. Okay, the next policy then is, for second reading, is the student attendance policy 503. And Jen, thank you again, Lexi, so much for all your work on this. Thank you. And all your work to keep our district safe. Yeah. I've been out reading to kids in the last few weeks, and the teacher always says, "Will you say what a school board member does?" And so I say, "We work to keep your schools safe." Thank you, Lexi. Okay, so student attendance, 503. The school board believes that, the purpose is the school board believes that regular school attendance is directly related to success in academic work, benefits students socially, provides opportunities for important communications between teachers and students, and establishes regular habits of dependability important to the future of the student. The purpose of this policy is to encourage regular school attendance. It is intended to be positive and not punitive. This policy also recognizes that class attendance is a joint responsibility to be shared by the student, parent, or guardian, teacher, and administrators. This policy will assist students in attending class. And with this one, again, we do have a regulation that we'll be reviewing as well. Jen will bring it up after she reviews this policy.
Yeah, thank you. For the public, Jen Larva, Director of Secondary Education. As you recall, we actually looked at the regulation last time. I wanted to talk about the form, which is another little piece of this. So our attendance policy is under review. There were some statutory language changes, and I wanted to make sure this got in front of you. And we really tried to, with the regulation, lay out what is an excused absence and what is an unexcused absence so that it's very clear and that we have consistency across our multiple schools that we have in the district. So the big piece in statute that had changed is that section, which I think is on the second page, under excused absence, where it said application may be made to any member of the school board, a truant officer, a principal, or the superintendent. So I will let this lay here for now if there's any further questions about the policy, and then if we can go and look at the form is really addressing this application piece of the statute change.
Had we had a form before?
No, because we haven't had to apply before, so I wanted to get your feedback last time that we met, last month.
Right.
And we had conversation around the policy, we had conversation around the regulation, and I did tell you that a form would be coming, that would be attached this month, so.
Any questions or comments?
I think we had great conversation last month, so it's probably pretty clear. So if you look at 503F, I numbered it that way, which means that it is a form. This is really a form to appeal for excused absence. We laid out and articulated pretty clearly what would be excused absences, but if there was, for some reason, something was deemed an unexcused absence, we wanted to be able to have that appeal process for families. So if you take a look at this form, it's really pretty straightforward, but I did include an appeal process on there. So, you know, if they were wanting to appeal a decision regarding attendance, we would want them to first submit the form to the principal, and if that couldn't resolve the issue that they were having, then it could be appealed to the superintendent or someone acting on his behalf. And if further action would be warranted, then, you know, that, we didn't want things to come directly to the school board. We want to keep you in governance, but not necessarily approving everybody's unexcused absences as excused. And then, you know, if they were already working with a truancy officer, then there was also on there that they could work with their truancy officer. Are there any questions about this form that was created? I did also include the statute on it so that parents would have reference to that as well, wanting to make sure that that was pretty important that we kept that on the form.
Would this be available electronically?
It would be attached with all of our policies, and with our policies related to student attendance, they do go into the family handbook.
yeah.
So it would be included in there, so they would have access to it, yeah. The form would be
The
online.
form would be in the student family handbook.
Yeah, it would be put in there along with the regulation, so that the policy, regulation, and form would be inside the family handbook.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Member Loeffel, do you have a question or? Okay, great.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit before. If you're okay, I have a family celebration that I need to get to real quickly before I can go down to lobbying. So if you don't mind, I was going to talk a little bit about 504.
And I'll just read it and
Yep.
then have you talk about
Yep,
it.
that'd be
So
great.
504
Hate to jump
is
ahead of
down
Jason,
under
but-
policies for review. And so it's F, and it's student dress and appearance, and then there is a 504 regulation, student dress and appearance. So we included the policy because we're reviewing the regulation. So we're not really reviewing, making changes to the policy, more the regulation. So 504, the purpose of this policy is to enhance the education of students by establishing expectations of dress and grooming that are related to educational goals and community standards. And just a reminder that we did adopt this policy July of 2023, and I know at that time, there was a lot of discussion and input from students and when this was adopted back in 2023, so.
Yeah, so Jake Laurent took the lead on this one back in 2023. He met with the POV group and the goals group, so that's the East group and a Denfeld group, I think, Golds group. I think he met with some student government groups, but it really had gone through a lot of work with our students and also with our principals and our APs. We had lots of conversations around the policy and then the regulation as well. We just have one chunk that we want to update in the regulations, so that's why we're bringing the policy back just for you to just review again. Does this mean that this would be like, once it's reviewed, it would get a new date put onto it? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And because it's a review, it only will go on the consent agenda this month. So do you want to comment, any comments on the policy itself before Jen reviews the regulation that we have? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So then the regulation is 504R, and we're just making a couple of tweaks to 504R. We've had some concerns, mostly about addressing PE classes specifically, and so we've cleaned up the language just a little bit, and this has, again, gone to the APs, it's gone to the principals, it's been reviewed by TLE, we've gone through our groups that we usually go through. So really, we're just taking out the specific language, about what needs to be covered. We're just saying that certain body parts should be covered and that clothing must be appropriate for the activity, if it's outside or PE or the classroom. That's really the change that we're making. We're not trying to be so specific. People ask me questions about, well, are midriffs covered? I'm like, you go shopping these days, are you going to find that every single person's belly button's going to be covered? You're not, we're not being restricted that way. But what we are asking is that kids come to school in a shirt, some sort of pants, could be skirts, whatever, we have that listed out there. It could be leggings, whatever, but they need to just be covered. We want to make sure that weather appropriate garments and outerwear are being worn, especially when we're talking about the littles, when we're talking about these cold mornings and cold lunch periods. We want to make sure that they have their things. But then we did add in those parts about the appropriate clothing for PE classes. And so specifically addressing swimming, we are stating that a well-fitting swimsuit is required. So it needs to be fitted really well so that we can, and our PE teachers, they know what to do if a student does not have a well-fitted swimming suit. They will make sure that they're contacting their families and making sure that that's being addressed. We've had some issues with some of our filters at our swimming pool sites. So, a swim cap should be worn whenever you're in a pool. And then we wanted to make sure that kids knew that they had the option to wear a rash guard. I call them rash guards, but they're also called swim shirts. So it can be whatever terminology people have, but those are options for all of our students. And then in our gymnasiums and our weight rooms, we just want to make sure that they have shorts and t-shirts. That's what's required, and clean athletic shoes. So, yeah, those are the main changes of this. We had already made some changes regarding headwear earlier, and it was just kind of like we just added the word note, that just so that's kind of called out that staff are allowed to direct students to remove headwear that causes disturbances. Those are the only changes that we're making to that regulation. Everything else is the same.
Okay, so this will be on the consent agenda, and it would go through.
Thank you for the accommodation.
So many of these policies are reviewed because of legislative changes. I had my mic off. So policy 516, student medication and telehealth. The purpose of this policy is to set forth the provisions that must be followed when administering non-emergency prescription medication to students at schools. And you can see highlighted a number of areas in this policy. And we had adopted this policy last time, October of 2023. And Director Crane, do you want to do any comments on this policy before we open it up for questions?
In thinking about Ms. Lofald's preferences, I should highlight a few things that have changed in this policy.
Great, thank you.
Really, in essence, a lot of this is legislative changes, but policy 516 has been majorly reformatted. And you'll notice, if you have the copy, that says paragraph at the bottom of page 1, it says paragraph 3A2 was in a different section within the older policy, which is only a year and a half old, by the way. And when we adopted 516 in this 2023 version, it was majorly reformatted at that time. So again, some changes just the way they orchestrated the policy, but I'll highlight one section at the back that is new, and it highlights telehealth. And access to space, it's Roman numeral number 4, and all of those subpoints are new in the policy. Access to space for mental health care throughout the school district, and this is a recent change that has come about through statutes, and we are already practicing that. I'll give you some examples. When we have a speech pathologist that might go out on a maternity leave, we might not be able to find a speech pathologist other than telehealth providers. And some of those providers come to us living in the state of California. And we have students go to a Chromebook and or a computer device that we set up. We've done this for 10 plus years. My first time I did this, it was at Morgan Park, where the speech path went out on a lengthy maternity leave, and we used telehealth practices to provide the speech services to those students at Morgan Park. That dates several years back when we had Morgan Park as a facility in our school district. This year, we have a deaf, hard of hearing teacher providing services in the state of New York. Her name is Barbara, and she's doing an outstanding job. So through the use of interpreters and or paraprofessionals and or even in classrooms, they might be in a special education classroom, accessing connections with their deaf, hard of hearing teacher through online formats. I'll tell you this, that I don't have a lot of examples where we are practicing co-located mental health through computer access. We would provide it if we needed it, but we have enough co-located mental health supports already in our school district, where we have several different outside providers that use our school facilities, and they do that in person. They haven't had to do it remotely, so we haven't really bridged that gap for social and emotional supports within the school system. So I'll stop. Any questions about any additional sections of this policy?
If we were to have that, just because I know more insurances are covering telehealth, and in this section, it does talk about, providing the space in that. Who would be responsible at the school level to make sure there was space? I'm just curious.
That would start with the school administrator of each of our sites, and space is a premium at all of our sites. We know that. And I'll just give a suggestion that oftentimes that comes down to providing a safe location of it might be a space where somebody uses that. Some of our co-located partners use it on 2 days a week, and then that room sits open for 3 days a week. And that could be a space where we bring a student to access a online vendor of some sort. One last just note, in the beginning of the policy, it says administration of drugs and medicines, and that was a recent change in this policy too. And just so you know that the word drugs is just a broader term, that it also includes medicines. But it also, when you talk about drugs, you also include things like alcohol and tobacco and other illicit substances that may or may not be appropriate for the school setting. So our nursing staff, other people are looking at this. We're not saying we're bringing in alcohol or drugs, but it's just a broader term that showed up in this policy that we had a lot of questions about ourselves. So it's kind of what the definition of the word drug is.
Okay. Member Michael?
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to clarify, so the examples that you've given us are not for mental health telehealth providers. Those are for interventions that we're providing students that are required, not for mental health reasons at this time, right?
True. We have our own healthy fleet of mental health services within the special ed department.
Okay.
We also have a number of intervention staff. I would say we have 13 special education social workers that provide mental health. Our case managers support mental health. They're the first access point. Our special education teachers can do that. And then also we have a fleet of around 12 other social workers in various capacities that also provide some interventions. Their services are more tier 1, tier 2. And as I said, we have co-located mental health that comes in from other agencies, but we're not accessing online vendors at this point in our school buildings.
So am I correct in the assumption then that we're including this language in this policy because it's state statute and it's required of all school districts to offer this ability if necessary, but here in
Yes.
Duluth Public Schools at this time, we most likely are not going to be taking up these offers of that we're going to have to do.
It's a requirement to allow it in our school buildings,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you for that clarification. I did note that in some of the language, it says about having procedures to receive requests to access the space if necessary. And the last point under D, asking about whether or not the school district would want to have to request a consent form to be signed by the student or their guardian, depending on their age, to utilize services in the schools. Is that something that needs to be decided upon now, or does it need to be something that we have a process in place for if and when this does spring up?
So I know we have a process in place, started long ago and carried through by Callie DeFrent. Now it's Todd McGowan kind of leading that charge. I would have to ask Todd what our current process is. I know they have a system in place where they can make a request, and Todd helps funnel those requests. And if there is a form, I would have to ask Todd if there's a form to fill out.
Okay,
I speculate, Mr. Bonds isn't in the room, but I speculate there is.
great. Okay, good. I was just wanting to make sure that if this is something that we have to be putting in policy, that there's the structure to fulfill it if necessary.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Just to clarify on that, this section is just for telehealth, but what you're maybe referring to is for the co-located services, or?
Well,
I just
there
wanted
is a structure for the co-located
Yeah,
services.
okay.
But remember, Mike Cassell pointed out that there should be a way to request this access, and I would need to check with Todd just to determine what that process looks like. And I don't even know if he's aware of this policy and the nuances that have just changed because this is new, coming to us within the last 2 months.
Comments or questions? Okay, thank you on that one. Then the next one is policy 532, use of peace officers and crisis teams. Thank you, Director Crane. 532, use of peace officers and crisis teams to remove students with IEPs from school grounds. The purpose of this policy is to describe the appropriate use of peace officers and crisis teams to use a restrictive procedure or remove, if necessary, a student with an individualized education program, IEP, from school grounds. And again, legislative changes on here. We reviewed it last time in it was adopted last time, 6/20/2023. Is there anything you want to note, Director Crane, on this one, or it's,
I can note.
okay, thank you,
No, we're good.
okay,
Um,
okay.
No, so this, if you remember, there was some legislative changes related to holds that police officers and others could put on a student depending on situation. And there was some very, very severe limitations from at least from the police perspective that were put into place. And so there was a lot of concern or controversy statewide as to what police could or couldn't do. And so when the Congress came back in place last year, when the senators and representatives came back into place, they revised the language, and so this is reflective of those changes. So there's still limitations, so, because we want to make sure that we're not putting kids into unsafe holds, but there is, you can see from the changes, some of the things that were put into place, so it's a little bit, it adds greater clarity to what we're doing. And I just want to note, too, that our police department here in Duluth stood with us and kept their police officers in our schools during some of this controversy, as opposed to many other districts where the departments pulled their SROs.
Just a note of clarification on maybe why we wanted Director Crane to come forward is there two separate policies? One that, I remember we worked on this policy, the change in the hold for 3D and the definition of a school resource officer, but this one says to remove students with IEPs. And I just knew that we had, this policy must cover all students, not just students with IEPs. Am I confusing the issue?
Member, or Director Crane?
Yes, I think we have two separate policies because we have a special education policy around physical restraints and holds for special education students. And that's state statute as well. You have to have that policy. I do a report every spring on the number of physical holds and seclusion incidents that a district sees, and that goes to the Department of Education. And now there's a separate Department of Human Rights Commission that I have to report to as well on the number of holds in our school district. Know that we review that data quarterly as a district, how many holds have happened each quarter. And statistically, we've gone down in the number of physical holds, which is a great thing that we've seen. We've had years when we've been over 200 holds. The last few years that I've reported physical holds, it's been around 20 total holds over the whole school year. So that's a really good thing. I don't have that policy up right now, nor the other one, but I'd be happy to talk more. Is this first reading, only reading, or is it?
This is a review because of legislative
Okay.
changes. Okay. Why don't you stay up here just in case? Member Michael's question might pertain to you as well.
I think some of the confusion is also just the way that it's listed on our agenda. The title on our agenda says, no, I've lost it. Use of police officer, or peace officers and crisis team to remove students from school grounds, when the title of the policy is to remove students with IEPs from school grounds. That might have also added to some of the confusion there. But I appreciate that our state legislators provided some extra information so that we could make this more clear, and recognizing that these changes are coming from the state level. And these are language that we're required to have in our policy.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Again, this will be on the consent agenda. The next policy is policy 535, service animals in schools. The purpose of this policy is to establish parameters for the use of service animals by students, employees, and visitors within school buildings and on school grounds. And I just want to remind the board that we adopted it 10 of 2022, and a lot of conversation went into this, and this is one of those policies that I kind of referenced before, where Director Cranes brought it for a first reading in May, but we ended up not passing it till November, as we were just getting more clarifications, and so this is an example of how we did that. Again, do you want to just highlight any of the changes with this one? It's on the second page under 4, access to programs and activities, permitted inquiries, and then there was a statute change.
So basically, it discusses the unfair discrimination practice of prohibiting somebody from bringing a service animal into place if the service animal is proper as far as harness, et cetera. And then it appears, and I'm wondering if there might have been other school districts that were charging a fee or a payment if somebody was bringing a service animal, because now there's something saying that we are not allowed to charge a fee. And that might be related to things as well related to, I'm thinking of hotel policies and things like that. So maybe they were just seeking additional clarification to make sure that schools too wouldn't charge like a pet fee or something like that.
And we never have in our district. Yeah.
I got it open, so thanks for being patient with me. This is area across the nation that have seen some pretty significant litigation and lawsuits won for the families when they've awarded financial gain for the families because of mistakes that school districts have made. So the policy actually highlights the two questions we can ask, which is this animal required related to any disability area? And it doesn't have to be just special education. It could be a 504 significant support that a service animal might provide. And then the second question, what work or task will this animal provide and support the child in the school setting? So if we should not be asking, prove it, you have a service animal license, what training have they done? All those things should be avoided, and it really guides the district to have a healthy cooperative relationship. And we've had several service animals implemented within our school buildings, and several of them have come for a period of time and then went away because it really didn't, through the data collection, really didn't benefit the child like the family thought it would. But for those instances that support a student in the school setting, we will continue to support those service animals in our school setting according to this policy.
Great. Thank you. And again, I know a lot of work was done and discussion happened back in 2023 on it, or 2022. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. .608 Instructional Services, Special Education. The purpose of this policy is to set forth the position of the school board on the need to provide special educational services to some students in the school district. And last adopted was 2016. Comments?
Yeah, legislative changes, Patty sent a few of these my way. And as you can see, the opening, starting of this really talks about early childhood. It didn't have this language in the policy previously. And early childhood services is a very important part of any school district service model. So it added some experience for developmental delay category, and that's the category that we use for our any student 3 to 5, but we do Part C services, birth to 2 as well, just to be aware of that. And this was enacted by the state of Minnesota, so we needed to update our policy. Physical education is in there under that Part D there. Developmental adaptive physical education was added to this policy as well.
Okay. Member Michael Sell?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's what I'm curious about. Seeing that we may conduct assessment just for physical education as a standalone evaluation without conducting a comprehensive evaluation unless the parents request it or guardians request it. I note that the legislature enacted that, but they also said that that is permissive and not mandatory. And so I'm curious to get your input as to why we should keep that in this policy if that's the case. Tell me more about standalone evaluations for PE.
So when you think about our service team, a lot of times pre-K students are not going to Phi Ed classes, but they might qualify for services at age 5, not yet in kindergarten. And then when they get to kindergarten, they also have physical education. And that's where we start providing some adaptive Phi Ed coursework with a special education service provider. So it's really nice to be able to implement a standalone assessment for DAPE services so that you don't have to bring in the whole team again when they may have just qualified for the other services is short as 6 months ago. So we can add a service with that evaluation and provide that. There's another area, functional behavior assessment for social emotional services. You can do some things standalone for social emotional services when previously we couldn't. And this is just a project where the state of Minnesota and the country is listening to reducing paperwork workload among special education employees. This is an example of reducing that workload. Instead of bringing a team of 8 people back together, you're just asking the DAPE teacher to conduct that evaluation. So it makes sense to me to have it in there.
Okay, thank you so much for that explanation.
Thank you. You're a wealth of knowledge. Director Crane. Thank you. Okay, so the next policy for review, 515, protection and privacy of pupil records, and this is replacing 1150, our request for information on students. And just a reminder, when it's replacing, it means it's usually incorporated if it makes sense into our new policy. So the purpose of 515, protection and privacy of pupil records, the school district recognizes its responsibility in regard to the collection, maintenance, and dissemination of pupil records and protection of the privacy rights of students as provided in federal law and state statutes. Okay.
I can speak on this one. So this one was primarily just a definition change from legislation about directory information. One of the main changes it had in here is there's 2 separate definitions now for directory information. One is under federal law, and then the second is under Minnesota law. So Minnesota law has a different definition for directory information and what you can share with people than the federal law does. And so that's an important distinction that we needed to have outlined in this policy. So that's the main reason why it's being brought forward.
And the legal references are, with the statutes, are in the back. And again, we adopted it the last time in 6/2023. So just recently, it was there were legislative changes last time as well. Member Michaelsell?
I guess it's more of a comment. It does read a little clunky when the federal law and the state law are vastly different. And so, and some of it's also just all the notes that we have in there now. But just, I don't know if there's a way to make it more clear. Like, federal law says we can share names and addresses and emails, but state law says that we cannot, and plus the other items. And therefore, we will be following state law. If that's like a suggestion that I would have, whether or not it's, something that the rest of the board would support, I don't know. But just to make it very clear, because it does seem like we're saying 2 different things when it comes to that. And then I noticed that there was also some language around children of judges. And just wanting to know if there is a way that we're being clear about school staff know not to share that information out in any other way or form. I'll look into that and send a message, perhaps with some more information.
Yeah, that'd be good. And we will follow up on any questions you have related to that. And like all of our policies, as we continue to introduce them and adopt them, we are trying to communicate them to our administrators and then all of our staff, trying to figure out what do we need to do, who needs to be trained. In this case, it would be the administrators and the clerical staff, it's our enrollment people, making sure they are fully aware of what they can give in terms of information. And so it gets challenging, and this is one of the more confusing ones, I would say, as well, in terms of like, what should we do and how do we articulate that in policy?
Is this one that we should have our own lawyers look at for any reason for clarification?
I was going to say, you can answer if you want, but I don't think so, because I think it's very clear what the federal law is
Okay.
and what the Minnesota law is, and it distinctly says Minnesota law is over federal law. But we could, if you think if you want us to.
Yep, I'll seek some guidance from our attorney on this one,
Okay.
especially given Member Mike So's recommendation on verbiage.
Well, and I guess just given the current climate also right now, it might be good.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Any other, Member Lofold?
Just for the clarity of the policy, once it's a policy of update, is the purple and the red, then, they're not, so how do you highlight the federal definition over, in the Minnesota? Right now, we have it in purple and in red throughout this, but when it's a book policy, it won't be as obvious what that looks like.
So actually, the purple and red right now we're a little bit far behind. One color was for 2023 changes, and then the other color was for the 2024 legislative changes. So we have 2 years of changes that are included in here, and that's why they have the 2 different colors. And then I like that you brought that point up, because normally I take all the notes out when I do the final copy, but I feel it's very important for this one to leave the note where it specifically says that Minnesota law is over the federal law. So I'll leave that in.
Can you also, where it has under D, definitions, bold or something, where right now you have it in pink under federal law, just maybe highlight that in a different way in the paragraph itself under directory information?
Sure.
Okay. But I would be in agreement too of keeping that note that you were referencing. Any other questions on this policy, Member Lofold? Okay, thank you. Okay, then the last policy, actually, we already did, 504, which was the student dress and appearance. And then the regulations and forms, again, we reviewed before that. So we are done with our policy meeting. Just want to remind folks that we are doing our March policy meeting on Thursday, March 13th, being Monday, March 10th. Many of us will be participating in a lobby day. So thank you.
And regrettably, I will be out of district at that time as well, but thank you.
Thank you.